have been dozens, if not dozens, of new laws and new obstacles put in the way for African Americans and for all people to have the right or to access the vote like they should. We are here today with Reverend Jesse Jackson to support his effort nationally to fight to make sure that voting rights is a right for all Americans, that is a constitutional amendment and not just an act that can be given to the states to determine whether they should allow you to vote in a certain way or not allow you to vote in a certain way. We stand with him in the city of Newark. We stand with him as the mayor, as the council here, unified, representing almost 300,000 residents of this city, to say that we believe that voting is a right for all Americans. It is a right just as you have the right to breathe, to eat, to live, to housing. You have a right to vote, and your vote is your voice. And we want to make sure that the Constitution of the United States protects all Americans around their voice and around the opportunity to vote in this country. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Reverend Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In many ways, it is strange that the strongest suit we have to play in world affairs is we are a great democracy. For 246 years, African people were constitutionally enslaved. Africans could not vote, but women could not vote. And we kept evolving. Finally, in the 1920s, women got the right to vote. In 1870, the voting rights law was passed so that all of those who had been born into slavery would have the right to vote. We made a big mistake. We left voting implementation in the hands of former slave masters to implement. And so from 1870 to 1965, the Voting Rights Act was not enforced. All kinds of absurdities, how many bubbles in a bar of soap, and how many beans, jelly beans in a jar, and then murder in the case of Medgar Evers, and intimidation did not allow people off to work about the right to vote. After the tumultuous battle in 1965, we got the 1870 Voting Rights Act enforced, with sections 4 and 5 as trigger mechanisms for enforcement. The mistake that we made twice: we left former slave masters in charge of the Voting Rights Act in 1870 and former segregationists in charge of voting implementation in 1965. The struggle for democratizing our democracy was not for blacks only, though blacks mainly led the struggle. Blacks could not vote in 1965. White women could not serve on juries in 1967. 18-year-olds could not vote. You couldn't vote on college campuses, or you could not vote bilingually. You could not vote proportionally in national conventions. Then you add to that the schemes of gerrymandering, annexation, at-large, and roll purging just made impediments too great to bear. Against those odds, we had massive change in America's political makeup between 1968 and 2008. Then the Supreme Court removed the enforcement mechanism, Section 4. So today we have the state's right to vote. Every state has its own separate scheme to determine voting. In a state, if you can vote while in prison. In most states, you can't. So what happens is, in much of the South, they've used voting denial for two things. One, they take away the right to vote and the prison for profit complex. So they make money off of prisoners and make political hay by removing their franchise. Obviously, that must stop. The reason we had the debacle in year 2000, where the winner lost and the loser won, was the state law of Florida says stop the count at midnight. There were 27,000 in Duval County that was left uncounted. The uncounted votes determined that Bush was the winner and Gore was the loser, though Gore had the most votes. Now that's unacceptable. In 2004 in Ohio, they had dry machines in the White House and wet people in the lines. Every state has its own scheme. Now in Texas, 600,000 voters lost their franchise a month before the election. The judge ruled it was too late to make the adjustment. 600,000 arbitrarily removed from the rolls. In Texas, you can vote with a gun ID, but not a student ID, for example. On North Carolina, they're removing voting from college campuses. So every state has its own voter suppression scheme. What we want is the constitutional right to vote, not the state's right, the constitutional right to vote. This must be done. It requires a constitutional amendment. Most people think they have their constitutional right. They do not. If there is proof of discrimination, the federal government can intervene. But the cost of proof is so expensive, the bar is so high, it often does not happen. So we need the constitutionally protected right to vote. This should play, it's not about Democrats, it's about democracy. It's not about Republicans, it's about the Republic. One assumes that we have such a right. We don't. Every state has a 50-state separate and unequal election. I want to congratulate the mayor and this council taking the forward step of voting and resolving to fight for the Constitution protect the right to vote for all Americans. Thank you so very much. Questions?
Anybody? No questions? You mean not even from this guy right here?
Ma'am, I didn't hear you. We are, matter of fact, already Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cincinnati, Ohio have passed this amendment. Before we got to 5, we had to get to Newark, and thanks be to God, Newark has made this progressive step. Now legislators must get involved in the act. One of the difficult parts of 1965, that was the assumption that you couldn't vote by race. Didn't take into account gender and gerrymandering, annexation, and large schemes, but you kind of couldn't vote. Now most people think they have their constitutional right to vote. They do not. They have the state's rights. Every state has its own mechanism for voting, and each state has a different scheme to control the process. We're choosing control over growth and growth over fairness. Yes, sir.
Reverend Jackson, could you describe the process that will be necessary in order to be able to get this before the states to vote? What that's going to entail and what obstacles you see in that regard?
2/3 of the states, to get an amendment to the Constitution, have to vote for it. It's a long-term battle, but I'd rather fight the right battle and lose than the wrong battle and win and have cheap grace. Fighting for the constitutional right to vote for American democracy is a fight worth fighting. I'm convinced the more people are made aware of it, the more it's likely to happen. Because this transcends party and race and gender. We all deserve it, and we think we have it, but for the most part, we do not. Yes, sir. Well, sometimes people's spirits are broken. People oftentimes make the error of spending more than we have and voting less than we have. Like you make 100, spend 200, have 100 votes, vote 25. That's a formula for disaster. We must, in fact, increase voter turnout. But many people feel their vote does not count. When you win the election and still lose, they feel, and often they see no relationship between political democracy and economic democracy. They don't see a connection between voting and economic change, and that must change. That's why we just we're focused on Silicon Valley, because outside of our voting, there's $6 trillion in taxes unpaid offshore. $6 trillion. 10% would be $600 billion. You could rebuild infrastructure by our citizens, do first-time startups with that kind of money. There's no relation between voting and getting that money back. Silicon Valley has 189 board members and 20 companies, 37 women, 3 blacks, and 1 Latino. And yet we are over-indexing in our consuming. So we're trying to bring our political democracy and our economic democracy closer. Why do you have thousands of abandoned homes in Newark and vacant lots? The banks using subprime predatory lending schemes drove our cities into holes. About 2 million blacks alone lost their homes. We bail out the banks, but not linked to lending or the reinvestment. So the banks are washing capital. Homeowners are still looking at next door properties boarded up and vacant lots. So we must engage the entire process, voting, and actually voting really should be automatic at the age 18. You shouldn't have to spend any money in voter registration. There should be no politics in voter registration. But the Supreme Court has now passed, you can pay up to $770,000 for a candidate. I mean, you can literally purchase you some democracy. $770,000 you can invest in a given campaign. That should not be. Because it means one person, one vote is null and void when one person can put up $770,000.
Sir.
And rules matter so much. When I ran in '84, thank you, Sister Crump, and others of you, in '84, we got about 3 million votes and only 400 delegates. That's because of something called winner take all. If we didn't get 51%, we couldn't get anything. We changed the rules in 1988. You get as many votes proportionately as you get popular votes. So our vote went up from 400 delegates to 1,200 delegates. In 2008, when President Barack Obama ran, Hillary Clinton won California, Texas, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. On the '84 rules, she would have been the winner. We democratized democracy, and in 2008, he became the winner, only because the rules changed. We democratized democracy. Everybody should have the right to vote without being politically inhibited. Everybody should have the right to vote at age 18, but we certainly deserve a constitutional right to vote. We're trying to clear up the stream and let voting become a free-flowing right of all Americans.
Sir, where do you go from here to move forward, and when do you hope to have this implemented by?
Ma'am, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, how do you move forward with this? Where do you go now, and when do you hope to have this implemented by?
Where we go next, and how long, when do you think it should be implemented by?
Well, what we need to do now is to get other cities across the state, cities like, the Oranges and Camden and Atlantic City and other cities in Philadelphia. It must be a bottom-up movement. It will not come top-down. It will be bottom-up. So we'll get other cities around the state and legislatures to begin to support the amendment for the right to vote as a matter of the Constitution. Yes, sir. My brother's keeper, huh? Well, with our vote, we must demand a return on our vote. We need a plan for urban reconstruction, a plan to rebuild houses that were lost because of the bank debacle and let people have jobs rebuilding those houses. A plan to effectively use pension funds to invest in our cities. A plan to use offshore tax monies to invest in infrastructure. With the Rainbow Push Wall Street project this coming week in New York, 13, 14, 15. Intel President Brian Krasinski will speak on Tuesday. They just did a $300 million investment deal with the Rainbow this past week. At noontime, the 50 top companies that have diversity records. On Wednesday, Steve Ballmer, former head of Microsoft, will speak. And the World Bank president will speak on Thursday. There'll be a Rainbow Push Wall Street Economic Summit this coming week in New York. Our point is our votes and our economic growth must matter. If you vote and nothing changes, it was exercised. There must be some relationship between political and economic democracy.
what do you think the church's role is in social justice?
In 2015, the role of the church must be to fight for a government that's just and fair and protects the weak. You know, Christmas really is not about Santa Claus. It's about a new leader born, upon whose shoulders a new government would rest with justice and peace without end. So the church must fight for governmental policies that wipe out malnutrition and not wipe out the malnourished. The church must fight for policies that afford all people housing. After all, Jesus was born to a homeless couple. We should be sensitive to babies born in mangers and others born in mansions. That is the church's role, to make us more sensitive to all human beings.
That concludes our questions for today.
Of letting young people in early ages in school understand the importance of voting and what's going on. They would have a better, like they did back in the day, they would have a better understanding, and they would be able to come out more and support the effects by the time they're 18 years old. That's one question. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Well, all of us should vote our interests. Since credit card, student loan debt is greater than credit card debt, and school is becoming more unaffordable. Every high school senior, we just left the Science Park School this morning, should come across the stage with a diploma in one hand and a voter card in the other. Every student at the Rutgers, those who want student loan debt removed as a stimulus to break up the boomerang effect on education, should use their power. There are more 18-year-olds than there are 81-year-olds. Students have the power if they're taught to use it in their own interest. Thank you very much.